What up, Awesemo? PeteyMac, Greg Ehrenberg. We got Tyler producing as we get ready for another big Tuesday slate. This is the MLB Strategy Show. And Greg, looking fresh, baby, since last week. You got the cut. I got my first haircut that wasn't cut by my wife in about 6 months today. It's a big day.
Yeah, hey, those are the things that are exciting these days. But yeah, I mean, we've got even more importantly, we've got a million baseball games today, 13 games, which I mean, frankly, not necessarily my favorite slates. It's just a lot of options to go through. But there does appear to be some leverage, even though there's such a big slate. There's definitely some teams that are going over-owned for sure, and then some teams that are under-owned.
And those top stacks are free at Awesemo.com today. So be sure to check that out. Like, subscribe, everything we got going on here in the Awesemo network. And remember, if you can't watch on YouTube, check out our podcast network. We've got a podcast for every sport available on every major platform. So you can head on over to awesemo.com/podcast for all the latest. And if you leave a 5-star rating and review one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or email address, you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. One winner will be awarded every Friday, and reviews will be eligible to win for up to 1 year. So let's jump right into it here. 13-game slate beginning at 7 o'clock Eastern time. We'll start with the Yankees and the Orioles. And the Yankees, people were jumping on them as the top stack. Rougned Odor might have been the most owned position player yesterday and put up a big donut.
Yeah, so here's something that yesterday I was doing the morning show with Spags yesterday, and we talked about the Yankees at pretty great extent. So first of all, I understand why a lot of people rushed to the Yankees yesterday. They were the team that was projected to score the most runs. Therefore, they were team projected for the most ownership. They were going up against Matt Harvey, who's not been good for a very long time, although he looked good yesterday because the Yankees made him look good. But the Yankees have not had a good offense to this point in the season. And there's always going to be an issue of ownership to me. Like I weigh ownership so heavily when I'm making decisions on baseball. And it's not about which team I think is going to be the team that scores the most runs or what are the best individual plays. It's what are their odds of success relative to their ownership. So, yesterday when you looked at a team like the Yankees, you're like, oh, they have a 13% chance of being the top stack on the slate. That's really good. That's the highest odds of anybody. But then you compare that to their ownership. And it's like, well, they're projecting for almost 30% ownership. And you just have to ask yourself in that kind of situation is, all right, I think the Yankees are good, but then you have to ask yourself, do I think they are greater than 30% likely to be the top scoring team of the day? If to you the answer was yes, then that's fine. Go ahead and roster the Yankees. To me, on a slate like yesterday, where it was it 9 games, there's 18 teams to choose from, it's very hard to reasonably say that any one team is that likely to be the top scoring team. And I think it's something similar today where the Yankees, the best odds of being the top scoring team on the slate, 12% chance, but they're picking up nearly 20% ownership as a team. So I view this as a very similar situation to yesterday. It's 13 games, 26 teams to choose from. And the Yankees are not nearly as likely to be the top scoring team as their ownership indicates.
And the problem is, to me, it's hard to be right and to pick the right team that's going to take off and have the big night, go off like, say, the Giants did last night. If you are right and the Yankees are the team that has the highest scoring day, well, now you have to compete still with 15% of the field and try to make up ground with the pitchers, with the other 3 spots that maybe you have on Draftkings. It's hard then still to get up to the top when you have that much competition around you.
Yeah, so that's the other thing too with ownership, and it's different in something like basketball where, players generally have really high floors. If there's a center starting at, min price in NBA and we think they're going to play 30 minutes, the odds of them failing is very, very low. But for baseball, any individual player, they only get, four chances, maybe 5 chances at bat. And it's not that hard to envision a scenario where somebody puts up a 0 or anything like that. So, I mean, it's just, to me, the Yankees are going way over-owned once again today. And like you said, also, even if the Yankees were the highest scoring team on yesterday's slate, where they're picking up nearly 30% ownership as a team, even if you hit on them, all right, so did a lot of other people. You're competing with a lot of people. Whereas, and by the way, I was on a lot of other stacks also that did not do particularly well yesterday. It's not like yesterday was a banner day for me. I'm just kind of using the Yankees overall as an example. But once again, if you are on the Yankees and the top scoring team on the slate, you haven't even guaranteed yourself anything. Whereas if you're on a team like the Chicago White Sox, we have a really positive leverage score, and I will talk about them later. They're only picking up 2% ownership as a team. So therefore, your odds of success on that particular stack are a lot higher, especially when we have them much better chance of being the top scoring team on slate relative to what their ownership is.
Yeah, they go nuts. You're in the top 2%, and then you can try to take down a GPP from there. How about looking at the Orioles here? Corey Kluber has really struggled this season. Has not looked like the Klubot. What do you make of, say, the Orioles being a team to jump on as Kluber tries to get right with the Yankees?
Yeah, so something else to say about an overarching theme of this slate for me is that there are a lot of really good pitchers to pay up for. And when those guys are typically options on slates, that's something I try to prioritize. So when I'm looking at the top stacks tool today, I'm also going to be looking pretty heavily. And by the way, top stacks tool is free today on Awesemo.com, but I'm going to try to prioritize overall teams' chance of being the top value on the slate a little bit higher than I normally would, just because, I mean, we have Lucas Giolito, Max Scherzer. There's a lot of stud pitching options, and that is the safest way to find points on fantasy slate. Even somebody like Corbin Burns, who relatively sucked yesterday, still ends up scoring, 16 DraftKings points. So there were still GPP winning lineups that had him in first place just because 16 fantasy points is a really high floor, right? Like, he was basically as bad as Corbin Burns could possibly be. But it doesn't matter. Like, there's not going to be a slate where Mike Trout sucks and scores 16 fantasy points. There's not going to be a slate where Corbin Burns sucks and scores 0 fantasy points. Just the floor for ace pitchers is much higher than it is for stud hitters. So I want to pay up for pitchers today. So one thing I like about Baltimore is, like you said, Corey Kluber struggling a little bit today. Also, the Yankees bullpen has had to be really extended because of some not so great starting pitching outings lately. Like yesterday, they didn't get a lot of innings out of Deivi Garcia. But the Orioles with a 5% chance of being the top value stack on the slate, also only picking up 2% ownership. So given the decrease in velocity we've seen from Corey Kluber this year, now somebody's struggling to throw over 90 miles per hour. Also a very hitter-friendly ballpark in Baltimore. Baltimore side, I think, is a spot that's going a little under-owned and is a team to be on.
And I love what you mentioned about the bullpens, where it's kind of hard to keep track, but we're starting to get to that point in the season where a bullpen can be a bit run down if they've had a long week. And maybe this is more of a factor later on in the season when months and months start to add up. But if you can hit that spot where, the team's given up and throwing the position player out there, I think the Twins did it in the 7th inning a few weeks ago. I think it was the White Sox actually on a Giolito start. But if you can hit on one of those, that's where, boom, you're taking off in a big way. It's kind of impossible. These teams run out of pitchers when they have like 14 pitchers on the roster now, but it does happen. Yeah,
and then, I mean, the other thing also is, I mean, if you look at the Yankees had to use O'Day yesterday. They had to use Wilson. They had to use Chad Green. They only got, 4 innings out of Deivi Garcia. So in a tight game, a lot of times teams will burn some of their top relievers. And then even if there's a competitive game the next day, you're getting guys who are either a little bit tired because they pitched the day before, or they just might be unavailable. And then they have to use, their not optimal set of relievers, which I think could be the case for the Yankees today.
Well, let's get to one of those big pitchers on the slate you were talking about earlier, Max Scherzer, with a relatively tough matchup against the Toronto Blue Jays. It's in Dunedin, where we know the ball's been flying out early on this season. What do you make of this matchup for Max Scherzer, one of the more expensive pitchers out there?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely somebody who's going to be in my player pool. I prefer Lucas Giolito and Walker Buehler to Max Scherzer. One thing that does concern me a little bit about Scherzer is, number one, like you said, this kind of like makeshift minor league ballpark that's become the Toronto Blue Jays home for the season. It appears to be a very hitter-friendly park. And one thing we've seen with Max Scherzer is when he struggles, he gives up home runs. So this could be an issue where Scherzer, I think, is a little bit riskier than he normally is. The strikeouts will be there for him, and he's definitely somebody, like I said, going to be my player pool, but I'm prioritizing the other pay-up pitchers before I get to Scherzer and Walker Buehler and Lucas Giolito. That and the Blue Jays present a really difficult matchup. This is one of the better young hitting offenses in baseball. So I'm going to be on Scherzer, but there's other guys that I prefer.
Now, I tend to jump at teams like this, but I wouldn't expect the Blue Jays to score, let's say, 10-plus runs today against Max Scherzer. But you might get 4 homers, and they might all be solo shots. But if you hit the right ones, you're looking at a decent amount of points there. Is that something to consider, even against a pitcher the likes of Scherzer?
Yeah, I think as one-offs, the Toronto bats make some sense, just because like I said and like you said there, when Scherzer struggles, he gives up home runs. This appears to be a hitter-friendly park. So some individual options like Danny Jensen on DraftKings. And by the way, like catcher is an impossible position to like consistently get fantasy points out of. So Danny Jensen, min price on DraftKings, 2,000. So that to me is appealing in itself, just because catcher already a position that's kind of difficult to get production out of, and he's so cheap. Rowdy Tellez, first baseman with some power upside, he's only 2,800. Biggio, 3,600. So I mean, there are guys that have definite upside in this lineup that are really cheap that I think makes sense as one-offs. Just outright stacking the Blue Jays isn't really my favorite play, isn't really my favorite way to go about building lineups on this slate, but some one-offs here and there, because I think that Scherzer could give up some home runs. I think that's sensible.
And do some homer hunting, especially there at the bottom end of the Toronto lineup. Next up, the New York Mets hosting the Boston Red Sox. Not the banner pitching matchup. Garrett Richards, David Peterson, they were both bombed their last time out. Is this a game where you're expecting some runs at Citi Field, or one that we can kind of ignore a little bit on the fantasy slate?
So the Red Sox are one of my favorite teams to target on the slate relative to ownership. They have a 3.5% chance of being the top scoring team on slate, and are literally picking up no ownership right now. We have them projected for 0.2% ownership as a team at the moment. So as long as that holds for until lock, this is one of my favorite teams to stack up for that reason. I mean, just a team that's going wildly under-owned relative to their odds of success. So there are a lot of individual hitters that are really expensive in the Red Sox lineup, but I mean, there are also cheaper guys that we could round out a 5-man stack with on DraftKings that makes it viable, right? So Hunter Renfroe, who's always at left-handed pitching really well, he's 2,900. Bobby Dalbec, who's a promising young hitter, he's 3,200 at the bottom of the order. So there are guys we can mix in with, like Xander Bogaerts, JD Martinez, to make a 5-man stack still viable here. And given how low the ownership is on this team and the overall struggles of David Peterson, I think the Red Sox are a high upside team to stack. And then also Kike Hernandez, 3,800. He's cheap on FanDuel and DraftKings. So the Red Sox right now are definitely a priority team for me to get to.
And you'll be able to see that leverage. Again, Awesemo.com, those top stacks are available for free today. As for Garrett Richards, he's entering with an ERA of 6.5. The Mets lineup, look, Pete Alonso looks like he did 2 years ago rather than last year. He's on close to a 50 home run pace. What do you make of this Mets offense after a day off yesterday, trying to get things going against Richards?
They're pretty neutral play to me. It looks like they're going about fairly owned relative to their odds of success on this slate. They have a 4% ownership share, but also 4% chance of being the top scoring team of the day. I don't understand how, well, number one, Garrett Richards is not nearly the pitcher he used to be, but I don't understand even how he still has like remotely the same velocity he had when he was younger, because Garrett Richards at this point, he's had elbow injuries, shoulder injuries. He's torn his ACL on that play where he was fielding a ground ball and run to first place and blew out his knee. He's had all these injuries, and even though he's not effective anymore, I'm just kind of impressed that he's still able to throw like 94, 95 miles per hour, because he's injured every single part of his body at this point in his career.
He must be throwing that weighted ball around, Gotta build up those shoulder muscles again. Yeah, we see this all the time, though. When these guys go through Tommy John surgery and such, they do all those boring exercises to strengthen the shoulder, the elbow. They come back and they're throwing harder than they were.
Not with shoulder injuries, though.
Not with shoulder, typically.
So
yeah.
He's had shoulder injuries, but also he's torn the ACL. Like, it's just every part of his body that is broken down. But like, the velocity's still there. He's not found success as a pitcher this year, but it's just impressive to me that he's still able to throw as hard as he does.
The bionic man still making it happen. Garrett Richards, I guess, for Boston, or at least velocity-wise. Let's hit Oakland, Tampa Bay. Frankie Montas, Michael Wacha, the matchup there. Low-scoring game a night ago is Rich Hill did a nice job for Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so the game that I was definitely on the wrong side of, Rich Hill, 41 years old. And yeah, he looked like he was on the – I still think he's on the decline, but the randomness of baseball, yesterday he happened to deliver a really strong outing, and the A's were my favorite stack on yesterday's slate. Did not come through at low ownership. So, I mean, there was also some wonky stuff in there. There was Andrus called out at home on a play where he was clearly safe.
That's
like not even remotely close of a play. They went
the
to
replay
replay.
has just gotten worse. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. It makes no sense now. They don't review things that are obvious. They do review things and then they don't care. It's a mess right now.
And to what end, right? Like, so what is, you go to replay on that play. He's clearly safe at home, right? Like, no doubt about it. You could see it slow-mo, a million different angles. He's safe. And they they still don't change the call. Like, I just don't understand what the point is.
No, they just slow the game down, right? Let's look at something for 3 minutes, give you no explanation of what we saw, and leave it up to the announcers to guess what happened. This is instant replay in Major League Baseball at this point. It's horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, like, to me, I still like the idea of instant replay. Just get the calls right.
Get the ones that are clear and obvious right away. But that's one that should be clear and obvious, right? You look at it for 20 seconds, you go, he's safe, and that's it. But when you can't even get that call right at home plate, what are we doing?
So, I mean, either way, that was not going to make or break the Oakland A's. It was a crappy stack, even with that one. But
you never know. One out. You can do a lot with one out.
Yeah, no, they got to play the what if yesterday. It doesn't matter if they're going to strike out 10 times against 41-year-old Rich Hill, aka Dick Mountain, and just nothing going for them. So, yeah, they did not work out yesterday. As for today, I still think they're a team to get to. If we look at Michael Wacha, who's pitched a little bit better this year with the Rays, but still there's a lot of inconsistency there. And I think that he is a pitcher who's capable of getting blown up, and still there's a little bit of there's a reason to stack the A's. I think they're going a little under-owned. We consider 3.5% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, 2.5% ownership share. So not a high priority play for me. Definitely not as nearly, definitely not the same amount of conviction I had yesterday, because I really liked the Oakland A's yesterday. Going slightly under-owned, but not to the point where I want them to be the team that I get the most exposure to again.
What do you make of Frankie Montas right now?
So, I mean, Montas, he still throws, really hard, even despite the PED issues he's had and whatnot. He's still throwing one of the hardest throwing starting pitchers in the league this year. But I still have to look at the quality of pitchers that are on this slate overall. And I think there's just other guys to prioritize. That and Montas is really popular. We have him projecting for 24% ownership right now, but only a 10% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on Draftkings. I think there's enough strong options for pay-up options. I don't think there's reason to consider him for Fanduel on a single pitcher slate. So Frankie Montas, to me, somebody I think is going a little bit over-owned. I'd rather pay up for the likes of, Giolito, Max Scherzer, Walker Buehler, Ian Anderson. So Montas is not really a high priority play for me.
And you hear some of the tools that we're talking about there on the Awesemo site, as well as the ownership projections. You can get all this by joining Awesemo Plus. It's $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, the player projections, ownership projections, a premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much more. Only looking to play Major League Baseball? Well, you can sign up for Awesemo Plus MLB Weekly for only $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning, and join Awesemo Plus today. And those tools are vital, as we're talking about, especially the ownership, where maybe you see a night ago, Rougned Odor 40% owned, and you stay away from that one and try to find some leverage spots, which did hit last night. I mean, it's the Marlins and the Giants that ended up being the big stacks, and there was some leverage if you wanted to take a shot on those.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what the numbers were yesterday, but certainly the Giants had much less ownership than a team like the Yankees, and talk about them later. But it seems like there's a little bit of an overreaction to the Giants today after what they did last night.
Yeah, it was 12 runs, and Buster Posey and Evan Longoria turning back the clock, but we'll get to that a little bit later on in the slate. Next up, the Cubs and the Braves. This was a high-scoring game in Atlanta. If you had the Braves stack, you were feeling pretty good early, and then kind of watched it fade on the leaderboards. But Trevor Williams be going for Chicago. Ian Anderson, always at least an interesting pitcher, goes for Atlanta. And yeah, I tend to think this ballpark in Atlanta, especially as it starts to warm up now and it's getting hot here in the Southeast, the ball can fly out of that ballpark pretty quickly.
Yeah, so starting with Ian Anderson, though, I do think that he's one of the better pitching options on DraftKings as an SP2, just because of his price point. He's only at 8,600, and he's somebody who I think warrants being a little bit more popular than that. That and the Cubs, kind of an underwhelming offense so far this year. So something I mentioned yesterday is I'm starting to look more at the stats for this season as opposed to just looking at the last 3 seasons. I'm starting to weigh this season a little bit more heavily, and we have the Cubs so far this year with an 87 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They're also striking out at 27.3% of their plate appearances against right-handed pitching. So overall, it looks like the Cubs are going to be a very positive matchup for right-handed pitching, despite what it might appear on paper, just when you look at the name value of the Cubs and look at names like Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo. As a whole, this is an offense that has struggled against right-handed pitching, given some of the moves they made in the offseason. I think there's a good chance that's going to hold going forward. So Ian Anderson, second full season in the big leagues, still one of the more promising young pitchers in baseball, in my opinion. Also a high strikeout guy, which is favorable for fantasy. Looks like he's going a little bit under-owned in our top pitchers tool. And actually, we have Ian Anderson with better odds of landing in the optimal lineup than Max Scherzer or Walker Buehler. So 8,600 for Ian Anderson in what appears to probably be a more favorable matchup than most people think. He's one of my favorite pitching options today.
So Ian Anderson looking good. And then former Pirate alert with Trevor Williams on the other end.
Yeah, so Trevor Williams regressed a little bit last game against the Mets. He got hit around a little bit. He also didn't work all that deep into the game, only ended up pitching 5 innings. But Trevor Williams, something else that me and you have talked about with some of these Pirates pitchers who, hey, they spend most of their career with the Pirates, they go elsewhere and they find a little bit of more success in that appears like it's going to be the case with Trevor Williams as well. But looking at the current ownership for the Braves, I mean, they just look about fair to me in terms of odds of being the top scoring team relative to the ownership. But the issue with the Braves is that they're so expensive. Acuna is really expensive. Freddie Freeman is really expensive. So given that I want to try to pay up for pitching today, I think it's just going to be really hard for me to make stacks of the Braves with the lineup construction I want.
Next up, the Miami Marlins. I mean, a night ago, I don't know how many people were like, let me go after Corbin Burnes tonight, but that was one of the plays. You look at the optimal lineups on DraftKings and Fanduel, you had mini stacks in the Marlins. There were 3 Marlins in the DraftKings optimal, 2 Marlins in the Fanduel optimal. If you had the guts to play it, I saw, some of the GPPs I was playing in at the top of the leaderboard, people who went at Corbin Burnes and stuck with the Marlins and hit.
Yeah, well, it helps when every time Jazz Chisholm gets on base, he's just stealing all of the bags, right? So like Chisholm in the first inning hits a double, steals third base, ends up getting stranded there. But then later on, he had a double that had it was a ball that had an expected batting average according to Statcast. I think it was of 50, but still ends up finding a hole in the right spot, ends up getting on base, and then right after that, Miguel Rojas hits a single with an expected batting average of like 200. And then just like that, Corbin Burnes, a little bit of trouble to start the inning, just kind of unraveled from there and ended up having his first subpar outing of the year. As for tonight with the Miami Marlins, I actually don't think they're a bad team to go to. They are definitely really cheap and they're picking up no ownership. So the Marlins 0.3% projected ownership on FanDuel, on DraftKings also 0.3% projected ownership. But they're cheap enough that it's easy to stack them and pay up for pitching. And then also, I mean, these are some of the spots that I'll look for on a 13-game slate. There's always a lot of teams to choose from, but when somebody like the Marlins has a 2.2% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, about 3% odds of being a top value, and literally zero ownership, I think this is a team to be on. Not necessarily comfortably, but if I end up with the Marlins in 5 or 6% of my lineups as a stack, I think that's a play that I'm comfortable with getting over the field on.
And that was something I was going to ask you. How far will you extend yourself on some of the teams that you like on a given day? I mean, are you covering the bases on, this is a 26-team slate? Are you covering the bases on half of those teams, less than that, really focusing on a couple that you love the leverage and their ability to go off?
Yeah, so there's not going to be any one team that I have, like even 15% exposure to probably on a slate that's this big. It's more so I'm comparing to, all right, here is the lineup construction I want. When I look at the pitchers for today, it's like, okay, I want to pay up for pitching. So I want to be cheaper at offense. And I'm trying to find, in general, cheaper offenses that I think are just going very low owned that give me a chance to build the lineups that I think are optimal on the slate where I'm paying up for pitching, going cheap at offense. Or I want a team, if I am paying up for an offense, a team like Boston that's picking almost no ownership. So a team like Boston, 0.2% projected ownership as a team, like that's a spot that I'd be willing to pay up for. But in general, on a slate like this, and I think this answers your question, I'm generally covering the bases. I'm getting exposure to a lot of different teams, but everything I'm viewing is in relation to how much the field likes those teams.
Well, let me ask it this way. What's going to make or break your night? So if you're spreading yourself out that much, you're not sitting there just rooting for one team to go off and have the big night. You have that covered in a lot of ways. So it seems like maybe Lucas Giolito tonight or some of the more expensive starting pitching, that'll be what you focus on and know this is what needs to hit in order for me to go where I want to go.
So funny enough, actually, what makes or breaks my nights isn't what's in my lineups. It's what's not in my lineups. So like yesterday, I'm watching the Yankees game to root against them,
yes.
Right? Because if that much of the field is on the Yankees, right? So if we have like 20% of the field on the Yankees and I barely have them, what I really want to happen is the Yankees just not have a big night. So like yesterday, what really made or broke my night is I'm watching, and obviously it didn't end up mattering too much because the teams that I liked didn't do well. But really, what was most important to me was that I was not on the Yankees, and rooting against the Yankees. That's probably going to be the similar thing tonight because once again, the field is 20% on the Yankees, and I'm just not. So that's really what's going to make or break my night is how well the Yankees do.
So you get to root against Rougned Odor again, and hope he has another offer there. Yeah, everyone was chuckling about Rougned Odor when the Yankees got him, and all of a sudden, everybody's jumping on him in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a really funny point, is because Rougned Odor, people on Twitter make fun of the Yankees. Oh, how could you sign Rougned Odor? And then and then all of a sudden, he's 30% owned on yesterday's slate, and like on a points per dollar sense, like he's not he wasn't a bad play. But it's more so just like, do you really think that Rougned Odor is 30% likely to be in the optimal lineup? And the answer to that is no.
It certainly was last night. Again, goose egg for Rougned Odor. Not a whole lot for the Yankees a night ago against Matt Harvey. And again, we'll see what they could do against Baltimore tonight. So let's go on to Philadelphia, St. Louis. It was a fun game yesterday. I love a good pitcher still. Zach Wheeler, Adam Wainwright, both pitched into the ninth inning. I'm curious, when is the last baseball game where two pitchers threw into the ninth inning? I bet you have to go back a little ways. I wasn't able to look it up, so I'm throwing out questions that I can't answer. But 2 hours, 22 minutes, and Zach Wheeler looked like the most important guy last night until Anthony DeSclafani went out and shoved late night.
Yeah, that actually is interesting. When's the last time two starters both pitched into the ninth inning?
You never see it.
Did Bieber and Cole both do it last week?
Oh, this past weekend?
Yeah.
I didn't. I missed that game, so it would be embarrassing if it was just 4 days ago.
It might have been. They might have just pitched through 8 innings or something like that, though. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of an interesting point that I hadn't really thought of. It definitely doesn't happen all that frequently anymore.
No, it's a rarity. Oh, Bieber went 7 in that game, and then Cole went 7 as well, at least this past weekend, if that's what you're talking about. But it was kind of an odd thing. And Adam Wainwright, another guy turning back the clock like Buster Posey a night ago. Maybe we don't expect the pitchers to shove again tonight. I mean, look, it's Carlos Martinez. He's been someone you could pick on early on this season.
Yeah, so with Carlos Martinez, somebody who, at a point in time was a really strong starting pitcher and came into the league, was really hard thrower, was able to touch 100 when he had to, and he's still not old, except I can't get Fangraphs to pull up because I wanted to look at the velocities, except it just spins, and then I think it just slows down the entire stream as a whole. So I can't look up the exact numbers. But off the top of my head, I remember he had an average fastball velocity of something like 98 miles per hour, and it's slowly dipped each of the last few years. They tried moving him into the bullpen, and that didn't really go all that well. So now he's back in the starting pitching rotation, and once again finding limited success in that role. So still a little bit of name value on Carlos Martinez, but I don't think he's the pitcher he once was.
Nothing to fear, and a lot of power there in Philadelphia. I'm sure it'll be another hot night in St. Louis, and maybe where you can find some homers there. And then Zach Eflin's off to a nice start this season. I am not exactly at the top of the Philadelphia rotation. What do you not like about this particular game? Yeah,
so I mean, I still think there's better spots to target than each of these two teams. It's not overall one of the best spots for offensive output, because even though Carlos Martinez has regressed a little bit, and Zach Eflin, I think, is a little bit overrated as a pitcher still. I mean, I look at the St. Louis Cardinals in the top stack stool, and it's still only a team with a 2.5% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. They are picking up really low ownership right now. So that would be, at least it wouldn't be a team I cancel out of my player pool, but still there's the high end bats in the lineup are fairly expensive. So I don't think that this is a team that's going to really make it into the lineup build I want. It's just kind of a neutral play to me. And I think there are spots that are with similar chance of success that are just picking up less ownership. Like we talked about the Red Sox earlier with 0.3% projected ownership, the Marlins sub 1% projected ownership. So definitely some spots where there's not much ownership there. And by the way, just something of note here, Mike Campbell in our YouTube chat is saying that Bieber and Giolito a few weeks ago both pitched into the 9th inning. I don't know if that's true or not, but at least he says he thinks it's true.
Well, okay. Well, we'll take your word for it. So, okay, it's not the rarest thing. Maybe we didn't expect it for Zach Wheeler and Adam Wainwright last night, whereas, Bieber, Giolito, a little different scenario. But it's a very much a rarity. I was disappointed. I mean, Wheeler walked the first guy in the 9th, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they pulled him. And then it seemed like Philly was going to blow that game, but they managed to hold on. One of the biggest edges in sports betting, you guys know all about this now. Shop to find the best line. And betting lines, they change by the minutes. They vary greatly depending on which book you're using. So check out Awesemo's Odds Shopper, and that'll bring everything in. You don't have to go from site to site. You can see what your best odds are, comparing the different books to one another. You can do it on a game basis, player props, you name it. Head on over to oddsshopper.awesemo.com, where we compile the best bets available for game lines, player props, player and team futures. It's all updated in real time. Nice night for the Angels a night ago. Of course, you couldn't have Shohei Ohtani's offense in the middle of that Angels stack, but Mike Trout returned to the lineup, 4 hits for him, just another day. And Trout gets to target Mike Foltynewicz in the Texas Rangers tonight.
Yeah, so the Angels, one of my favorite teams to target on this slate, a team that has the second best odds in our top stack, still being the highest scoring team on the slate behind the Yankees. So here's something for comparison's sake. We have the Yankees with a 12% chance of being the top scoring team, the Angels with an 8% chance. So there's a little bit of a gap there, but then you look at the gap in the ownership, and the Yankees have an 18.2% projected ownership share, and the Angels 7%. So for the 4% difference in the odds of being a top stack, but then we have 11% projected difference in ownership. So the Angels, to me, if I'm paying up for an offense, this is the team to be on. Like you said, we do have Mike Trout back in the mix. So Shohei Ohtani did leave yesterday's game, or didn't leave the game, but he was dealing with a blister issue. And he said, I think it was that his finger was starting to feel a little bit hot. So that was why they didn't let him pitch deeper into the game. And by the way, so Ohtani struggled in the first inning yesterday from a pitching standpoint, right? Yeah. Like in a big way. He couldn't throw strikes. And everybody just on Twitter is going, well, Ohtani, like, why even bother with having him pitch, right? Just have him play in the field. He'll be an MVP caliber player. And then he just shuts out the Rangers over the next 4 innings and is untouchable.
I was shocked. He still put up like 19 points last night. I was like, I thought he was getting 20. Clubbed. Over 20.
I think it was 21.3, if I remember the exact number. Yeah, Ohtani was great yesterday, especially for his price. But I just think it's funny because the way he started, it was like, well, I guess he can't pitch at all. But regardless, what we can do is hit. And for some reason, the Draftkings pricing algorithm, and I'm assuming that Ohtani is going to be in the lineup. He said that even though he was dealing with a potential blister issue, he does expect that he's going to be able to hit today. So 4,300 price tag on Draftkings for a guy who's leading the league in home runs. He's homered in each of the last couple of games. I just don't get it. Like it's the pricing algorithm. I think that him pitching and hitting has broken it in some way because he's always too cheap, especially after it starts. It makes no sense to me where he's priced. He should on every single slate be one of the most expensive hitters, and he just never is on DraftKings. So the price is ridiculous.
You would think that would jack up his ownership, right? If he's that cheap, and everybody, there's no secret that Shohei Ohtani can hit a little bit and put up some crooked numbers.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to have to, like right now, he's not projected for any ownership, and I assume that's going to update later in the day, and that will make it a little bit easier for me to make decisions. Yeah. Like if he's coming at, like 50, 60% ownership on a 13-game slate, then I'd be like, okay, he's going overowned. But I mean, right now he's my most rostered hitter, but we also have him projected for almost no ownership. So we'll have to see when that updates because that's going to change later on in the day.
So the Angels, and look, they got some power even in the bottom of the lineup when Jose Iglesias is hitting home runs, and he ended up in the some of the optimal lineups yesterday. So there's some pop in that Angels batting order, and they get to go up against Mike Foltynewicz. So a chance for some big numbers to be put up by the Angels. And then on the other side, Jose Quintana hasn't exactly pitched well this year, but we've talked about it. The Rangers are a team you can target, and even Ohtani, as bad as his first inning was, he's still able to put up some pretty good numbers a night ago.
Yeah, and I mean, the Texas Rangers as a team, they have struggled against left-handed pitching, and this year to start the year, a 76 WRC plus against lefties. So Jose Quintana has not been great over the last couple of years, but it's not like he's one of the worst pitchers in the league or anything like that. We did see him have a pretty successful DFS outing his last time out, and his price is so cheap in a favorable matchup that if you are stacking one of the more expensive offenses and you need to save salary, I don't think there's any reason to consider Quintana on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, it's just a 6,500 price tag and a really favorable matchup against the Rangers, who have the third worst WRC plus in all of baseball this year against left-handed pitching. Like, I think Quintana is a really good source of saving salary. The other thing also is the Angels offense is in such a good spot that it seems at least fairly likely that Quintana is able to pick up the win bonus. So, I mean, if you could get, out of like 15, 16 DraftKings points at a Quintana at that kind of price point, I think he opens up a lot in the offense, a lot in terms of the offense we could pay up for. So Quintana is my favorite cheap starting pitcher to roster today.
And it helps that you pay up for Lucas Giolito. Look, you might have that 5.79 ERA because he didn't pitch well at 11 o'clock in the morning at Fenway Park one day. But he gets maybe the worst offense in baseball. It certainly has been over the last week and a half. I mean, the Tigers just cannot score a run. I was listening to their general manager, Al Avila, this weekend on Sirius XM, and Avila was saying, Nomar Mazara went down and the offense went with it, and they haven't done anything Sunday or Monday since. So you want to target a team. We talk about targeting the Rangers. The Tigers, I know they can't hit lefties at all, but they're not really hitting anybody this year.
No, and it's not also they don't just hit teams. They also have a 27.3% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. So it's not like this is a team that's just grounding out or flying out either. It's a team that's swinging and missing. So that's favorable for DFS. Lucas Giolito also coming off that weak start against the Red Sox. His price has come down a lot on DraftKings. So 9,500, he's the most popular pitcher on the slate, but I think it's for a good reason. I think for cash games, certainly have him in your DraftKings lineup, even on FanDuel, where he's priced up to 10,600, so he's $1,100 more expensive than he is on DK. I still think that Lucas Giolito is a fine guy to pay up for. Overall, my favorite pitching option on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's going to be a little popular, but it doesn't really matter to me given what his price is in such a favorable matchup against the Detroit Tigers on DraftKings. Giolito looks like he's going to be the pitcher that I get the most exposure to overall.
What is it? Is it more of a Giolito thing, more of a Tigers thing? If you had to pick one end of it here that just leads you to the Giolito train?
So could you, it just cut out for a second. Could you repeat that again?
So is it picking against the Tigers or picking for Giolito that you like a little bit more in this particular spot?
Oh, I mean, it's a little column A, a little column B, right? Like, I still think Giolito, even with the struggles he had last game, if you look at sports books, he has, the fourth best odds of winning the American League Cy Young. It's Garrett Cole 1, Shane Bieber 2, and then we have Tyler Glasnow 3, and then Giolito 4. So there's kind of like tiers to what the odds are right now. But yeah, I mean, Giolito is still one of the best pitchers in the American League. Also very favorable for fantasy because of his strikeout upside that, and the Tigers offense is just garbage. So it's everything that points me towards Giolito.
It all comes together, that magical spot. And then on the other side, Jose Urena has the start for the Tigers and the White Sox. That offense is always a team you got to keep an eye on.
So, I mean, also Jose Urena himself, no good. Really, most notable point of his career is just, plunking Ronald Acuna and his beef with the Atlanta Braves. But now he doesn't have to worry about that pitching in Detroit. He could just be irrelevant for everything other than the offenses we want to target against him, because Chicago White Sox, another team that pretty high priority play for me, going pretty underowned. A 5.2% odds of being the top scoring team on the slate, but a 2.3% ownership share. They are a little expensive, which isn't ideal for me. However, I think that in one of the spots we're wanting to utilize Jose Quintana as a cheaper SP2 on DraftKings, this is the spot that I'd be willing to do, is to pay up for a team like the White Sox that have the fourth best odds of being the top scoring team on the slate with very, very low ownership. So The White Sox and the Angels are the two teams that I will want to pay up for the most.
All right, so the White Sox, one of the more high-priced options to look at is have the ability to break out, and then you hope they do if you got Giolito as well and get the win bonus on top of that. And then you can tell us all about your successes come tomorrow. We love to hear about it. So if you have a big night using our tools, advice, content, give us a shout out on Twitter. You can tag any of our hosts or our Awesemo social handles, and we'll retweet it from our Awesemo HOF account, where we compile winning screenshot shout outs from the Awesemo Plus community. Again, at Awesemo HOF. And there's some big numbers on there.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, if you want to be nominated into the Awesemo Hall of Fame, right, just tag it, maybe tag me, tag Pete, and be like, hey, look at all the success I had. And it could be because of me, it could be because not. Maybe you hate me so much you just fade everything I say. Maybe that leads to profit. Feel free to tag me on that as well. That would be cool also.
There's multiple ways to win here. There's multiple ways to get it done. As we know, there's no real bad lineup, right?
No, there is, for sure.
Oh, okay. There is a bad lineup. Okay.
Yeah, if you're just going to go out and you're going to roster all the hitters against your starting pitcher, which actually won a GPP a few days ago. But yeah, in general, that's not good.
Stop. How'd that win a GPP? Which game was that?
When Trevor Bauer pitched really well against the Padres, but the Padres, like Tatis, hit a couple of solo homers and they did some damage against the bullpen.
Oh my god!
So yeah, there was a 5-man Padres stack with Trevor Bauer as the starting pitcher going against them, won a GPP.
Look at that. See, no bad lineups, Greg.
No, there are.
Seattle, Houston, our next game. Marco Gonzalez, Christian Javier, the pitching matchup. Jose Altuve returned last night after being out with for COVID reasons, and Altuve picked up right where you'd expect. Stole a base, on base all day, got some things done.
Yeah, and here's, by the way, another team that I think is a good pivot off of the New York Yankees. We've got the Astros. Something else is, so with some of the more marquee teams, with the Yankees picking up so much ownership, just kind of everybody else that's projected to be one of the higher scoring teams on the slate then goes under-owned just by the nature of the Yankees being so over-owned. So the Houston Astros, 5% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but only a 2.5% ownership share. So this is another team who, by the Padres are another team that's going over-owned. So with me not being on teams like the Yankees and the Padres, I'm going to be distributing the ownership the field has on those teams to teams like the Angels, the White Sox, the Astros. These are all teams that are going, wildly under-owned in our top stacks tool, which is free to use on the site today.
So you can check out exactly where you can find that leverage that we talk about and hope one of these teams are able to break through. And look, nobody's fearing Marco Gonzalez, so why not take a shot at the Astros? On the other end, the Seattle Mariners, there's some pop in that lineup, but it's kind of hard to jump on that wagon tonight, I would think.
Let's see. So Seattle for today, only a 2% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but then also 1.5% projected ownership. So looks about fair, but given how low their odds are of being the top scoring team, and we're looking at the team with the third lowest odds on the entire slate, and while also still picking up a little bit of ownership. So yeah, to me, I don't think this is a team to be on. Definitely strong preference towards the Astros side. And then also talking about the Houston side of the game, there's, some cheaper bats that are in there that we could roster. Miles Straw, who's proven to be somebody with some speed, who has fantasy upside because his ability to steal bases. Kyle Tucker is homer upside. He's 3,900 on DraftKings. Miles Straw only 2,800 on DraftKings. So there are some cheaper bats to mix in with the likes of, Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman that definitely makes the stack tenable and still makes it able for us to pay up for the expensive starting pitchers.
And the other thing I just noticed is the Astros kind of look like the Astros again when you throw Jose Altuve into the lineup. You mentioned Miles Straw. He's hitting leadoff. I mean, he was in Altuve's spot for a while there, and now at least you have some thump, whereas before Carlos Correa is still hitting 6, but there weren't a ton of fearful bats in the middle there. We know this team lost George Springer this offseason, but without Altuve in the mix, it just felt like a different kind of offense.
Yeah, and it wasn't just they were missing Altuve, right? I mean, they had
multiple guys out. Bregman.
Yeah, for a while, everybody was out for COVID. Like the first game where it was like, hey, we have Abraham Toro hitting 5th for us. It's like, oh boy, this is not a good Astros offense. So it's having everybody back now. And overall, I do think it's a team that should have a lot more success going forward. But they got off to a great start for the year also. I mean, they started the year, 6-1, and it was either 6-1 or 5-1. Then everybody got COVID and they just totally fell off a cliff. But yeah, I expect them to pick it back up moving forward.
This is the MLB Strategy Show. It's brought to you by Odds Shopper. Be sure to check it out. You can compare different lines from different sites, different books, all at Awesemo's Odds Shopper. That's oddsshopper.awesemo.com. Check out game lines, player props, player and team futures. It's all updated in real time. Fernando Tatis Jr., I mean, what's the over-under for his home runs tonight? If I gave you 2.5, what are you taking?
Hopefully the under, because the Padres are a team that I'm not really going to be on today. Similar vein to the New York Yankees, these are the two most rostered offenses on the slate. So the Padres have an 8% ownership share, but it's 12%, 8% chance of being the top stack on the slate, but a 12% ownership share. So this is why I find them to be very comparable to the Los Angeles Angels. However, the Angels are coming up with a lot less ownership. So the Angels and the Padres, both of them 8% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but the Angels with 7% ownership, about half the ownership the Padres have. And then also as a whole, the Angels are a little bit cheaper of an offense compared to the Padres. So to me, I find the Padres to be going really over-owned. So like we said earlier, what am I rooting for today? I'm rooting for the Yankees to not score runs. I'm rooting for the Padres to not score runs. And I'm hoping for a different team to be the top scoring team of the day. So obviously, like individually as a play, like Fernando Tatis has a lot of upside and is one of the best overall fantasy plays on the slate, but is he somebody who I think has better than 35% chance of landing the optimal lineup? I don't think so. And that's what his ownership is right now, is 35%. Wow. And it's really hard for me to reasonably say that any one hitter is that likely to be optimal. Something like yesterday with Rougned Odor, great value play. But also Rougned Odor, people were making fun of the Yankees when they signed Rougned Odor. All of a sudden, he's 33% owned on yesterday's slate. I think Tatis at 35% ownership, that's a little bit too much. So, I mean, I think that if you pay up for somebody like Trey Turner or Tim Anderson, I think that you're getting not quite as good of a play, but relative to ownership, it's guys who are going underrepresented. So, Tim Anderson, 3% projected ownership, Fernando Tatis, 35%. So, who scores more fantasy points on average in this spot? Fernando Tatis. But does Fernando Tatis score more fantasy points than Tim Anderson at an 11x rate? No. So that's where I think we really have to weigh ownership on baseball. And that's also what makes it a really high variance DFS sport. And that's why a lot of times you make the optimal decisions. It works out over time, but it's not going to work out every individual night.
So let's focus on Tatis then, because, all right, so you're going to stay away from the Padres as a stack, but you do like Tatis as a play in a vacuum, but the ownership rates will change that. So will you consider Tatis in some one-offs, or do you just stay away from the Padres, period, in all of your lineups, essentially?
Yeah, so I do dummy builds in the morning, kind of based on like, hey, here's the information I have right now. And then I go into the strategy show and it's like, hey, I kind of have somewhat of an idea of the players I want to be rostering. So it's not that I would have 0% of Fernando Tatis, but right now I have him in 11% of my lineups. It's a third of the amount that the field has. So ideally, then I'd be, watching the Padres game and hoping for Fernando Tatis, even though he's in a small percentage of my lineups. I don't want him to have a good game because it's still way less than the field has, because I don't think that he warrants being 35% owned, because I don't really think any hitter warrants being 35% owned when we have almost every single team in the league playing.
Chris Paddock seems to be kind of one of those X factor guys where, is he good? Is he not? He enters with an ERA of 3.5, gets a divisional opponent here.
He was good. And I thought there was a point where he was going to be, like when he first broke into the league, I thought that he was, a near lock to be a future, Cy Young candidate type pitcher. And he just has a really hittable fastball. And I don't know if he tips his pitches or if there's other issues that are going on. So to your point, like, yeah, he does have a 3.5 ERA this year, but he does have a 3.97 expected ERA. The strikeouts aren't really there for him. He only strikes out 8.5 hitters per 9 innings. The walks are also pretty high. He's walking 3.5 guys per 9 innings. So that's inhibiting his ability to work deep into games. I actually kind of think the Padres, when they got Dinelson Lamet back, I think there was a chance where like, hey, if Lamet pitches really well, if we're able to add a little bit of depth, I don't know that Chris Paddock was guaranteed a spot in the rotation the rest of the season. But now that Lamet is hurt again, and who knows when he's going to come back, they're kind of saddled with Paddock. I think ideally they would like him to not make a playoff start once we get to the postseason. But At least for what his price tag is right now on Fanduel and Draftkings, he's easy enough for me to stay away from, but I don't want to stack against him either.
Okay, so Paddock kind of irrelevant on tonight's board when you look at that. And of course, we've been talking about these top stacks and the ownership for some of these top offenses. It's free on the site today, Awesemo.com. You also get the NBA Big Board, NHL top stacks, all free. Again, Awesemo.com. And we appreciate you joining us here for the MLB Strategy Show. Give us a like. Subscribe to all of Awesemo's content so you know when the shows are coming to you. You can set the alerts for that and make us a part of your day. When you're trying to figure out these big slates, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, whatever, get up, tune in, get the brain flowing a little bit, and start to figure out what some of the big decisions are going to be to make on a given night. Last night, the Giants were a pretty good decision. If you happen to go up against Austin Gomer and hit on Buster Posey, who is turned back the clock a little bit and all of a sudden hit for power so far this year, up to 5 home runs now. I mean, 30-plus points last night. But Giants, Rockies, and another place where you could target, Chichi Gonzalez making the start for Colorado.
Yeah, so once again, this is another team where on the surface, San Francisco – they scored a bazillion runs last night, and I'm sure a lot of people want to get to them again. But it's a team 3.5% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, and then they're picking up 6% ownership, so or 8% ownership on DraftKings, 6% on FanDuel. So it's a team that's going wildly over-owned. A lot of recency bias here after what they did last night against Austin Gomber. I'm not going to be on this team just based on what the ownership is unless something changes. But I mean, right now we have them as the second most negatively leveraged team on the DraftKings slate, trailing only the Yankees. So the 3 teams that are picking up the most ownership or too much ownership relative to their odds of success, and all teams that we talked about right now, the Yankees, the Padres, the Giants, these are all teams, in my opinion, you want to be underweight to the field on. A lot of people are going to be really high on them. So obviously it's a way that if the Yankees happen to score 10 runs, if the Padres happen to score 12 runs, easiest way for my night to end poorly. But I think that is the right play relative to what our current ownership projects.
We've touched on this a few times during the show, but looking back at that game last night, Anthony DeSclafani shoved for the Giants. He was one of the most important plays to have. I think 40-plus points last night on DraftKings and 60-plus on FanDuel. And he did it when the offense was great behind him. So, we talked about this a little bit with Giolito, but if you really like a pitcher or maybe you really like an offense, how hand in hand can that go? Because I got to think, look, you open up a 12-0 lead. The Rockies want to go home. They're swinging. They're looking to get the heck out of there. Sometimes it does help if you can rack up, some big-time runs behind a starting pitcher.
So I think it's going to matter in terms of picking up the win bonus, but it's not something I would consider to be massively correlated, right? I think that Fangraphs had done, and I don't know exactly for fantasy points how this will relate, except I know that Fangraphs had done a study on this, I want to say like 4 years ago, about the correlation between pitcher success while pitching with a significant lead. And one thing that I remember off the top of my head about this is that, because a lot of people say like, oh, if a pitcher has, too big of a lead or big of a cushion, like they'll let their foot off the gas, so they'll find less success. That actually ends up not being the case. But what does happen is the strikeout rate generally dips a little bit and the walk rate dips a little bit. So a pitcher will say like, hey, you know what I don't want to do when I have a 7-run lead is walk hitters. So we do see them throw a lot more strikes. So
the other guys want to go home. I mean, I think they're more aggressive too. I think it goes both ways.
Except the strikeout rate goes down. So it's not like they're swinging and missing more. I just think pitchers are throwing balls over the plate more. So walk rate goes down, strikeout rate goes down. So that in itself is just going to cancel each other out in terms of fantasy output, because it's like, hey, I'm walking less guys, but also striking out less. Obviously, a lot of fantasy upside comes from strikeouts for pitchers. But then you're also getting the potential win bonus. So I would say that maybe there's a slight positive correlation because of the win bonus points, 4 on DraftKings, 6 on FanDuel, but not enough to the point where I'm basing lineups around that.
And Aaron Sanchez is the star for San Francisco. Kurt Casale, it seemed to be the magic behind the plate for the Giants, catching 5 consecutive shutouts from 5 different pitchers as of this past weekend. I guess that streak went by the wayside, but Buster Posey caught DeSclafani last night. So it's not just Casale, but what do you make of Aaron Sanchez tonight? He's a hot pitcher.
Yeah, so one thing that's really concerning to me about Aaron Sanchez, though, so he was pitching really well as a chalk pitcher in his last start against the Marlins. did not get to work deep into the game at all. So I look at that, and it's like, going forward, how many pitchers are they going to let Aaron Sanchez pitch on a regular basis? So I'm going to pull up the exact pitch count number that he had last start, but it was not much. And that was even with him going really well. So then you start to ask yourself, like, okay, what happens if he's struggling, right? If they're that quick to pull the trigger and take him out of a game where he's, going really well, then if he starts to give up some hits or struggles with his command a little bit, how quickly will they pull him out? Because last game he pitched 5 shutout innings and came out after 67 pitches and 5 innings. And that's a big concern to me, because now we've seen his pitch counts the last couple of starts. He's thrown 67 pitches, 82 pitches, 66 pitches, and 74 pitches in his 4 starts this year. So I don't find there to be that much upside in a pitcher who has that short of a leash.
And that's a good point. And those are the things you got to pick up on, even if you think the Rockies stink, which they do. Their general manager resigns after sending their best player out of town. It's never a good sign. You send the franchise player out of town, and 3 weeks into the season, you're getting the old heave ho. Probably didn't make the right choice there.
No, it's kind of like how the Texans somehow allowed, or was like, hey, we're gonna let our GM trade away DeAndre Hopkins for nothing, and then we're just gonna fire him, a couple months later. It's like, why give him that much decision making power? So I kind of find that to be something similar, where it's like, why is somebody who has 1 foot out the door allowed to make decisions like trade Nolan Arenado? Yeah,
that's the way it goes. Reds Dodgers finishing up this 13-game slate. Jeff Hoffman, Walker Buehler, another one of those big pitchers you could pay up for. The Dodgers, I'll tell you what, it's nice when they have the latest game, because they've been playing the most entertaining games all season long.
Yeah, especially those games against the Padres. Like, I mean, we could go cancel the rest of the baseball season, just Dodgers Padres, and make it for the World Series right now.
All day,
cares?
All day, every day.
Both in the National League. I mean, those have been the most entertaining games. Give me Trevor Bauer versus Fernando Tatis all day. Hook it into my veins, and I'm good to go. That's good entertainment.
It's like Real Madrid, Barcelona. There's just 2 teams now. That's it. Those are the games that matter.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take your word for it. I don't know nothing about soccer, but okay. Yeah, if that's a good soccer game to watch, so be it. But the Dodgers in this spot, 4% projected odds of being the top stack on the team, 6% ownership as a team. So to me, it's not a stack I want to be on, even though, it's not many offenses have the firepower and the upside of the Dodgers, but the ownership's too high. It's a 13-game slate, and other teams I prefer to be on. So the Dodgers, to me, don't look like a particularly good play.
How about Buehler?
Yeah, so Buehler individually as a pitcher, not quite the exact same concern that I have with Aaron Sanchez in terms of limited pitch count, but with Walker Buehler this year, we have seen him not work that deep into games all the time. So far this year, he did throw 7 innings last start, but then 6 innings in each of the 3 starts before then. So Walker Buehler is definitely going to be in my player pool, although he is behind Ian Anderson and Lucas Giolito, and probably about close with Max Scherzer in terms of pay-up options. But I definitely prefer Lucas Giolito and Ian Anderson. I think that is the ideal 2-pitcher combination on DraftKings. For Fanduel, not a whole lot of interest in Walker Buehler. I'd rather just pay up for Giolito. So Buehler in my player pool, but not the highest of priority plays.
Do you like Anderson as a SP1 in any of these at all on this slate, or is he strictly a guy you're looking to pair with Giolito there?
Oh, I don't really think of it in those terms. Just he's in my player pool as my second most exposed starting pitcher right now. Like, whoever he's paired with is whoever he's paired with.
All right. So look, 13 games tonight, a lot of different ways it could go. I know you're looking at no Yankees, no Padres. That'll be what you're walking in on as of noon Eastern time tonight.
Yes. So the pitchers I like the most overall, Lucas Giolito and Ian Anderson. And then for offenses, I think the teams that make the most sense overall are the Boston Red Sox, the Chicago White Sox. If I'm going really cheap for a team that has absolutely no ownership, the Miami Marlins have about 2.5% chance of being a top scoring team on the slate and only 0.3% projected ownership. So that is the most contrarian offense I like right now. And then, like I said before, Red Sox, White Sox, Houston Astros. And
those top stacks, always something we're talking about quite a bit. And you have all the access, whether you're Awesemo Plus or not today. So check it out for free, awesemo.com. Fun show. Appreciate it, Greg. Tyler producing. I'm PeteyMac. Still a lot of content coming up on the YouTube channel today. We'll have the MLB Deeper Dive at 3 Eastern, tip-off at 4 Eastern, the NBA Deeper Dive at 5, and much, much more throughout the day. Happy stacking, fellas.